Hi, Jan, and welcome to season three. It took us a while to get here, but I think we are finally here. How are you doing today, and how are you doing this year?
Yep, it's been a great 2023. I just checked the year actually on the clock. Is it 2023? What year is it? Yeah, time goes by so quickly. But the good news seems to be that we're out of the pandemic. And, it's like a strange dream, isn't it? Like that kind of that once happened. We were all in lockdown. It's hard to imagine that that was once a
It,
normal reality, right?
yeah, yeah. It's hard to imagine that we had to live in the house and we couldn't travel. Yeah, but
And you
hey,
had to
we're
wear
over
a
it.
mask and you had to log in with apps anywhere you went. I mean, certainly here in Malaysia, it was really strict, right? That you couldn't
Do you
go
still
anywhere,
have the
do
app
anything.
on your phone? I don't use it, but I
No.
think I still have it out of fear that they might ask me anytime.
No, I got rid of it as a, but it was like, but it's funny how we can use something become so important that sort of yellow status in your My app
Yes,
is is crucial for your existence, right? And then suddenly
yes.
it's just gone, it's relevant.
It's gone.
Funny.
Yeah, it's gone. Yeah. But oh well, that's good. And I think we are back this year with so many exciting things happening, right? I think the number one thing would be ChatGPT. So let's start with that conversation. And what I want to bring forward today is Google and Bard, how Google launched Bard recently and they nearly lost no, not nearly. I think they did lose $100 million because of a error that Bard did. So what do you have to say on that?
I think this is going to be shape up to be a fascinating case study. But if you're asking me for one thing, I would say the patterns of history repeat themselves. That's why they're called the patterns of history. And in particular, the pattern of history, relates to the extreme difficulty in moving through paradigms. So paradigm, and especially the term paradigm shift, is a term called by the philosopher scientist Thomas Kuhn after World War II, an American philosopher, and he sort of wrote about the philosophy of science. And essentially, one of his sort of great arguments was that knowledge is structured around what he calls paradigms, so great organizing architectures. So, for example, the horse, right? The horse served humanity for thousands and thousands of years. I mean, it's an unbelievable paradigm, right? But essentially, it's a four-legged living being, right, that can only run at a certain speed and has a certain performance capability, right? A horse can only run so fast. A horse cannot run 100 kilometers an hour. A horse can only go so many kilometers before it needs to eat again, et cetera, right? And so knowledge is organized around paradigms, core beliefs, core constraints, core architectures. And then we innovate on that architecture. So, for example, with the horse, you're inventing stirrups, saddles, you're breeding horses to run faster, be stronger, right? All kinds of things that can be done with a horse. What an amazing animal it is, right? And um, so what then happens is truly disruptive innovation occurs, and I would actually perhaps even I would expect it's maybe beyond disruptive innovation. It's really going back to invention, and maybe something else happening there, because a new paradigm is emerging. So the horse being replaced by the car, right, is a huge paradigm leap. And so what you're doing is you're taking a core organizing architecture and completely removing that and going on to build a completely new architecture. And none of the companies that bred horses became car manufacturers. Right? There's some of the largest companies on earth were horse breeding companies, right? Imagine how many horses did the British Army need, the American Army, the German Army, right? To run your industrial factories, you're using horses were used widespread until World War One. Even in World War Two, there were horses, right? It was not that long ago, less than 100 years ago, that there was still widespread use of the horse. And these horses had to be bred. They had to be looked after with stables, right? There's a whole horse economy running around this, right? And none of those companies became car manufacturers. And so what we can see in that is that in that it's a very powerful example because it's so clear historically that as we go through these paradigm shifts, it's the pattern of history is that no one makes the transition to the new paradigm, right? So again, another classic example might be the switch from the feature phone to the smartphone, though I would say that's probably not as great a shift because you're still using a phone in some sense, right? So I think the horse and the car is a better example there. But within our lifetimes, that's experience. So that's something useful to understand there, right? Sony Ericsson, Nokia, BlackBerry, right? These were all the leaders. These are the case studies that we know and familiar with. So what's interesting is that we now seem to be standing on the threshold of a transition into an entirely new paradigm. Because what ChatGPT promises is that what we've always imagined an AI to be, conversational AI, right? Where you're not just, when you search on Google is basically finding pre-existing web pages, and it's really good at finding the right bit of that web page, right? So I love playing Warhammer, and I might say, you know, what do I do with the Veil of Darkness as my relic, right? Very specific, very niche bit of knowledge. And Google will often find the exact bit of knowledge I'm asking for, and that's great. But I can't then dialogue with Google and take it into new conversations, and it doesn't remember the history, whereas ChatGPT does that. Now, what's interesting about ChatGPT, as far as I understand, is it's not actually connected to the internet. It essentially downloaded the internet until 2021 and all human knowledge, and then works within that arena, really. And so we're seeing a whole new paradigm emerge here. Now, the question that stands out to me with your Lambda reference is, since Google was considered to be at the forefront of AI research for the last decade, why do they not have something that is awesome? Because if you want to bring out your big guns and say, don't worry, guys, we know the patterns of history repeat themselves, but we've got to trick up our sleeves and it's going to blow everyone out the water and destroy ChatGPT, you would have deployed it by now. And they don't seem to have it. So they don't have something extraordinary. And so what that indicates to me is that they have spent a lot of time building a better horse, and they're not ready to build a car. And the problem is, when you're really good at breeding horses, very little of that knowledge translates into building cars. So your comparative advantage is not actually an advantage anymore, and often becomes a hindrance. So if you want to put it another way, for companies that produce combustion engines are at a disadvantage trying to transition into the EV, electric vehicle economy, because you have to unlearn all the rules of the combustion car and relearn the new rules of the electric car, and they're completely different rules. And so what was once your strength and your competitive advantage and comparative advantage, we're really good at producing ICE internal combustion engines, suddenly becomes a great weakness. And this is what is disruptive. What was usually your strength is now your not just a weakness, but a catastrophic weakness. And furthermore, as we know from one of the Leadapreneur frameworks, the death spiral, all of this happens in an accelerated avocat environment. So what could be happening, 100 million people used ChatGPT in January. It's the fastest growing embracing of a new technology that has ever happened in human history, right? So it's possible to imagine that if we look at the Nokia case study, Nokia went from peak year of revenue to being sold to Microsoft for pennies on the dollar in 4 years. Now, that was unimaginable in 2009 when Microsoft was at peak revenue. By 2013, it was obvious. So the speed of Industry 4.0 and the fact that Google does not have a ChatGPT killer makes everyone very nervous about the fact that, is Google going to make it? Because then we come to this sort of final point, is what is going to be the key factor in enabling Google to make it? It's not money. It's not technology. It's not even necessarily your talent. It's your culture and the way in which you respond to this threat. The way in which you have to respond to this threat is with extreme aggression, what I would characterize as hyper sort of masculine qualities, a little bit like what Elon Musk has done at Twitter. Now, I know this might be controversial for some, but these sometimes are behaviors that are necessary. I'm not saying they should be used all the time, but in times of crisis, it's not the time to be more compassionate, understanding, and demonstrate more the feminine qualities. It's do or die. And either you figure it out or you die very quickly. And Google will not have a 10-year runway. They'll have a 5-year runway at best. But what will be happening is that if the threats materialize as they seem to be, their revenue will start to decrease, right? And part of what makes the death spiral so dangerous is that as your revenues are starting to decrease and there's pressure on middle management, the guys who actually run the company, right, to deliver, they can't deliver. And you're not going to start embracing innovation at a time when you're being squeezed and where your bonus and where your job is on the line. If your job is to just secure $100 million in advertising and you have to try something innovative, new, and risky to do that, you're probably not going to do it because you're going to try and do the tried and tested methods, but harder. And when we look at sort of the analysis of what comes out of, again, the Nokia case study, which I've kept a continued interest in, one of the consensuses has very much become that it was the culture of fear that existed in Nokia. People couldn't talk about how bad things really were. until it was too late. And so you could see one of the hallmarks of the death spiral, and again in the Nokia case study, is they just couldn't produce products that could beat Apple and then increasingly other Android devices. They just couldn't do it. They were always crappier. And so Google turning up with the second-rate Lambda, which gets facts wrong, right? ChatGPT gets facts wrong too, right? But it's the new kid on the block. Google's masterpiece should not be getting these things wrong. And the fact that it did demonstrates to me that there is this, you can't put one thing, but if I'm compiling the data points around it, and I'm a Google fan, boy, I love Android, I love Google, I think it's great, but I think they're in really, really big trouble. And the challenge is to correct that course, because you've been going the wrong way for so long. You have to the additional energy you have to spend to just write the correction, right? You don't just need to figure out how to, let's say you're breeding horses. You don't just need to figure out how to build a car. You have to unlearn how to breed horses. All the expertise, all the experts in your company who know how to breed horses or do the old way of doing AI are no longer credible, no longer relevant. Who do you listen to? How does this happen? And so I think it's going to be a fascinating case study, but the patterns of history repeat themselves, and it's most likely that Google will fall into the death spiral and will die now, or at least decline significantly, right? Will Google actually die? Who knows? But there's a very good chance it will become less successful, significantly less successful. Now, the caveat to that is one of my favorite companies and case studies is Microsoft, who were able to avoid this. Microsoft missed the transition to mobile, right? It completely missed that. And at some points in the late 2000s, people were like, well, maybe actually Microsoft is not going to make it. And they implemented a radical culture overhaul. One of the tenets of which was to embrace agile and to radically reorganize the way they run the company. And that has provided a critical success path for them to be where they are today. And they were indeed the second company to reach $1 trillion after Apple, right? So it is possible, but I think it needs to be done aggressively. It needs to be done decisively, and it needs to be done now. So yeah, what do you think, Hannah?
But yeah, and there is I mean, when you're talking about horses and you're talking about cars, that's like there's a massive difference between those two, right? Because one is animal breeding and one is completely into engineering. But when we're talking about AI and Google, I don't see, I mean, help me understand, how is that of a massive difference? Because AI, Google, as you said, has acquired a lot of AI firms over time, a lot of AI resources. So they do have the resources, they do have the skills, and it's not a massive shift from doing what they're doing to moving now to an AI sort of development kind of thing. So yeah, help me understand, how is that a massive shift? Because I don't really see it.
I think the shift comes into Google basically has a business that prints money. You buy Google ads and people search. The end. Google is a verb, right? It's a part, and you say Google anywhere on planet Earth and people will understand what you're talking about, right? So that's a status quo. And the way that ChatGPT works and things like follow-on AI technologies will work is completely different to this. If you use ChatGPT, you will never use a Google search again in your life. And so you will never click on a Google ad in your life. Right now, I'm being a bit extreme here, but that's ultimately, I don't think in 5 or 10 years' time, you're going to be Google searching. You're not, any more than you're sending SMS text messages these days, right? When was the last time any of us sent an SMS text message, right? But 15 years ago, that was unimaginable, right? So I think what that illustrates is the challenge around rethinking where value lies. So Google has to now figure out, not only does it have to deploy this world-beating AI at scale at a planetary level, difficult, but it also has to figure out the business model around that. And that's what's really tricky. How is Google going to keep making all that money with all their incredible margins and revenue? Basically, and so we have this pregnant moment now, and whether it's ChatGPT or not doesn't matter. Someone else might come along, maybe from China, India, the Middle East, Russia, Japan, Africa. There are so many talented and smart and capable people on this planet right now who have incredible tech, who are hungry, who are driven. So it's not whether it's about ChatGPT, it's someone like that who's going to come along in the next couple of years and conquer this. And that I think kind of illustrates the scale, because then you're coming back down to the operationalization of the scale. I mean, it's often said, but it's worth recognizing that, Henry Ford figuring out how to scale the production of the automobile is really the key. So it's how do you scale AI to a point where it's usable by individuals on an everyday basis, so that you no longer search in Google, you have conversational AI, and you are just in consistent dialogue with your AI. I think in 10 to 15 years time, we will just have continuous conversations with our AI. Hey, book my conversation. Hey, tell Hannah I'm running a bit late. Hey, create some ideas for me for our podcast. Children will be born, probably before they're even born, there'll be an AI monitoring their health in the womb, right? And then it'll be born. And then that AI will be with you for life.
Well, there's a new movie.
Right? And so
there's a new movie on that.
Right? The idea of explaining to that kid that you once did these Google searches will be hilarious, right? It's a bit like showing a floppy disk to people today, and they say, "Oh, look, you printed the save icon," right? And it's like, no, man, that was a floppy disk.
Oh yeah, the save icon is a floppy disk. Yeah, forgot about that. But yeah, and I have one more question, and sorry to break your flow, but you said that Google, one of the ways Google might make it is through a change of culture and taking the aggression route. But innovation is so associated with Google. Everyone knows that one of the most innovative company is Google. So how does the most innovative company becomes even more innovative or bring more innovation culture? Like, what do they do?
Well, this is where I would say, when was the last time that Google released something that was innovative? When we use Google products like Google Meet, which is just great on the one hand and just the worst at the other hand, right?
Yeah.
And so many other crappy little things. It was, but it isn't anymore. And that's part of the wake up. It needs to stop bullshitting itself and realizing it's not an innovative company anymore. It's basically grown fat, complacent, and lazy on the ridiculous amounts of money that it's been making. Now, of course, there's lots of talented people, and you have Google Moonshot, and there's lots of blah, 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 blah. Around, anyone could say any number of stories. Oh, but they did this, they did Google Loon, and they've done Google Fiber, and they've done Android, and they've done a lot of things. I'm not taking that away from them. But if they had been doing it properly and diligently, they wouldn't be in a code red situation right now. And basically, code red means that Google can die in the next 5 years. And so that's kind of the the way you break the death spiral is you have to have a really honest conversation about reality. You need to cut through the illusion and the blah, blah, and be like, we suck. We absolutely suck. We're crap. We're terrible. We have some good bits, but a lot of it is just rubbish. And we've been deluded and blinding ourselves about this. And we've instead been relying on our market positioning rather than our competitive edge to secure success. And unless we dramatically change this, we will no longer exist. The world doesn't need Google. So what are we going to do to earn our place in the future? And how hard are we willing to work to achieve that? And that's, I think, one of the things that needs to be recognized by the leadership of Elon Musk, who is turning Twitter around and transforming it into something else. Twitter, as it was when he took over, was definitely 100% going to die. It was falling apart, right? So it was not possible. Now, whether he's doing the right thing or not in the end will remain to be seen. But he is at least taking a strategy that offers new pathways to success that were not available before. Right? It's kind of like if you're falling down the mountain, you need to do something very decisive to stop falling down the mountain and start climbing back up it again. Otherwise, you're just falling down the mountain more slowly. But in the end, you're going to fall down the mountain and collapse at the bottom. So that, I think, is that sort of innovative culture at Google. And this is sort of what I meant about the pattern repeats. When you look into history, right, whether it's the 80s, the 90s, the 70s, it's the same pattern over and over again. Company is innovative, becomes extremely successful, scales and grows, the management bureaucracy takes over. The management bureaucracy prefers efficiency over innovation, right? And then you embed in yourself a culture that doesn't take risks. But especially what's happened today with the growth of communications, PR and things like this, which have an important role to play, right? It's important to communicate effectively, but there is a great danger that you just overuse and abuse communication to the point where you become delusional. And the finely polished stories that you're telling the world about how awesome you are just not really true. And then you become disconnected from reality, and that's sort of what triggers the death spiral moment, right? So what Google has done correctly in terms of averting the death spiral is recognizing that there is an existential threat. So that, bodes well. I hope that Google succeeds and survives and grows out of this and becomes an even better, more successful company. I think they're great. I support them. I really hope that they do. So, if anyone from Google's listening, chat to me about the death spiral framework, because I'll take you through it and can provide some interesting pointers about what to do and what not to do.
Well, looking forward to that. So we're talking about death spiral, and then there's a new headline coming up, which is the 4-day working week. And I wanted to understand from you, what would you say about that concept? And also, do you think there's a link between a company sort of accepting an innovation culture and then also taking in the 4 days a week working policy? Do you think that there's a link there? There's something that can be done in that space?
Oh, I think this is one of the most important places to create radical change and new possibilities, right? Not like 10% change, 200%, 2000% change.
200% by not working 1 day a week.
Yeah, because that becomes the beginning, right? That becomes the beginning, right? So, but somebody who's stressed and burned and work out, right, and is on the precipice of exhaustion, because what happens is you have, it's called in systems theories, you have a catastrophic cascading collapse. So basically, think about it as a, snow sitting on a mountain, and it just sits there very nicely. Everything looks fine, and then one day it just snows just a little bit, and boom, all the snow falls down, and you have an avalanche, and it's catastrophic, right? So what this means is that systems can tip very extremely with very little prediction, and it's irreversible. So particularly with people's health, they look like they're just holding on. Then one day, a little bump, something that doesn't seem so bad, makes them very sick and just takes them out. And I think what we're seeing in modern life, postmodern life even, is a chronic exhaustion and burnout. And for what? So if you had to work, for example, Monday, Tuesday, you had a break on Wednesday, and then you work Thursday and Friday, and then you enjoyed the weekend, I think this would make an enormous difference to stopping people from experiencing catastrophic collapse, right? You just get that little recharge in the midweek. I think that would be really powerful. Or, it could be 4 days and then 3-day weekend, right? Whatever you want to structure it as. But where the conversation then eventually goes is it becomes about output and productivity. It's not just about the hours that you work. And realistically, most people do not work 8 hours of productive work in a day. That's just ludicrous. Certainly not every day. You can't do that. And the expectation that you should is just silly and naive, and a product of the management mindset that sees the human as a machine. Why do we work 9 till 5? The reason we work 9 till 5 is because when Britain industrialized, you had daylight hours in winter and autumn that was from 9 a.m. till 5 p.m. And that's when workers could work, because we weren't electrified by then. And so that's why you have a 9 till 5 working week. It's a relic of the industrial era, Industry 1.0 and Industry 2.0. So there is very little research that I'm aware of, zero research that demonstrates that humans are at their best working 5 days a week, 9 till 5. It's just something that we've made a habit, because that's just the status quo that we default to. And it also gives, especially the management bureaucracy, which is hungry for control, power over people, right? I own you from 9 till 5, right? And it gives a certain routine, right? And then that creates all of modern day life. The concept of, why do you get up when you get up? Because you have to go to work. Why do you have to go to work? Because I have to be in the office at 9. Why? Because my manager says so, basically, is what it's going to come down to, right? And then you were talking to me about one of your friends, and she got fired because she came to the office 15 minutes late, right?
Yeah.
Even though she sometimes stays way late in the evenings. It's just absurd, right? And so you create this absurdism in this sort of management culture around trying to get your people to be productive, but you don't actually understand what it takes for them to be productive. And what it takes is for them to feel happy, healthy, energized, and fresh. And so having the conversation around what do we actually need to be at our best is crucial. And that step towards the 4-day work week is the right step towards achieving that. Because if in me running Leadapreneur, the worst thing that I want for our team and our people is burnout. That's absolutely unacceptable. It's not acceptable in any way, shape, or form, because it's terrible for the individual, and it's also terrible for the business, right? And what we want is happy, healthy, engaged team members who are working passionately on something they love. And you can't do that by trying to extract 45 hours out of them every single day. 45 hours out of them every week. I don't think that works. Now, for some people, yes, over sprints of time. But you and I both know that when we've gone into sprint mode, when we get to the end of it, we're exhausted, right? We're tired and we need days and weeks to recharge. So I think this is going to, what this is going to do is it's going to secure companies who pursue it an advantage. They're going to be able to hire the talent and retain the talent that wants to stay there. And because then you can always do more than a 4-day work week, right? I think what it becomes down to is actually organizing the way you organize your output, which is you need to get things done. So decide how you want to do it.
But then how do you so I get, so let's just say from an employee perspective, when I'm reading it, I'm trying to sort of think in my mind, what would I do with 1 extra days of the week? Like, what would I do on that day? So I was trying to think from in my perspective, but then I'm also trying to speak from an employee perspective. Will they even want to have this culture? I mean, how do you convince them? I'm hearing what you're saying about people will become more productive. There might be sort of a radical change around that, but then how do you really convince them in the end? Because they're all going to look at the amount of money they're spending on the salary, for example, and then the hours not being put into it. So how do you go around that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, right? So there's going to be a lot of variance around it. If you look at the data from the studies, the data is very clear. Productivity goes up, burnout goes down. So you're winning wins for your business. So the data shows it unequivocally. And that's part of what has been driving this growing interest, is the data is very clear about this. Now, the question is, can you make that happen in your company? Do you have enough leadership capability? And I want to emphasize the word leader, not management. Can you create a culture where people want to turn up, want to participate, right? Because of course, it's possible people might want to shirk off work and they don't care and they want to just kind of look like they're doing something, right? There's lots of opportunities for abuse there, but then those people should not be working in your organization. So it's coming out of this sort of, this sort of enslavement to work and saying we take work seriously and we're going to turn up and do our best. And sometimes if we have to work really hard, we'll do it, but we're not going to do it all the time to become to destroy ourselves. Because when I think what also happens, this idea of, and I've thought about this too with Leadapreneur, should we be working harder and pushing ourselves more, things like that? Yeah, we can. But I think we also there's only so much change and so much work you can do in a day, in a week, in a month. And what I think often happens inside organizations is there's so many meetings, there's so much noise. You're saying today you say left, tomorrow you say right, then you say left again the next day, then you say up, then you say down. And people aren't actually really doing work. They're just running around in circles, trying to keep up with the latest decision making. So by slowing things down, I think you can actually become a lot more effective. You can become a lot more resilient and healthy, and therefore more likely to achieve sustained success over time. And so that comes back down to the leadership in the organization. What is it that they really value? And that's where they will need to answer that question for themselves. But ultimately, for me, what I want us to build at Leadapreneur is a culture where we're happy, we're healthy, we're engaged, and we're able to do that in a sustained manner, not just burning people out and then throwing them away.
There was a conversation you and I had last week, which was about the control mechanism. Like, for example, telling someone to come on time, telling someone how to dress to come to office. It's all about controlling that person. Would you mind sharing more on that? And how can that eventually affect the company's innovation or growth rate?
Yes, well, I guess, in terms of wanting to control people by saying you turn up at 9 o'clock, and if you turn up at 9:05 because, there was an accident on the road and it was bad or whatever, and then the idea that you get into trouble around that, right? And then to what end? What is the basis? We said 9, now you're here at 9:05, right? So I'm your boss. Now I can make a big deal out of this because I can control this moment, because I have the tool from let's say not quite a law point of view, but a rules-based point of view, that you should have been here at 9. Now, I can then make you feel certain ways. I can make you feel bad, ashamed. I can be angry at you. Right? We can have all these kind of emotional experiences around it. But what are we really trying to achieve with this? Well, often it's just that people at a very basic level want to experience power and control over others. And so by enforcing these small rules, you actually get that sense of control over the other human. Now, what that then takes you to is that really effective? And I just think it's really silly. It's childlike. It's childish. If I'm engaging yourself and other mature adult professionals and something happens, it's because something happened. And it was out of your control. I trust that you will doing your best to make sure you can be there on time, or for whatever reasons. Or maybe you just like to be there at 9:30 instead of 9, and you make up for it in some other way. Essentially, the management bureaucracy moves at the speed of process and control, in the sense of me checking on you. Whereas in the emerging innovation ecosystems, we move at the speed of trust. So it's learning to trust in other humans, and those humans also being more autonomous and responsible themselves. Yeah, you can be late, you can do whatever you want, but that's also on you, right? And so often what people like to do is they like to blame their manager, but they also enjoy the fact that they have a manager to blame. So stepping up into these new environments where we have to produce innovation rather than just doing the same old business as usual requires much higher levels of autonomy, requires much higher levels of trust, not like 10%, but 1,000% more. And that's, I think, really where we are at that transition. Are people ready for that, to step up into that space and to start really trusting each other and trusting in themselves, not just relying on the compliance around it? And just to kind of like, one of the things that really shifted my mind around that is there was a great document that came out called the Netflix Culture Document. It's a PowerPoint. You can find it on LinkedIn or SlideShare. And it basically talked about their principles for building a high performance culture.
You mean the No Rules Rule one? The book that was written after it?
It might be, but I'm not sure exactly what the book is, but it started as literally a PowerPoint where they just present.
Okay. I know about it. Yeah.
So it could be that. And one of the things was just go on holiday. We're not going to track your holidays.
Yeah, I was just going to say, yeah.
And I just read it and was like, I absolutely agree. Like, why? It's just absurd that I would imagine that I'm tracking a 45-year-old's holidays and be like, no, you've taken one day too much in the beach in Phuket. You're in big trouble now and you're very naughty. Like, it's just fucking ridiculous. Oh, I should have said that word, but it is. It's fucking ridiculous, actually. It's a technical term for just how ridiculous it is. And it's just ludicrous that we think that that's a good idea. This is a hardworking professional who I'm paying a good amount of money and who's delivering a lot of value to my company. And I don't trust this person to take one extra day of holiday. I mean, it seems like such a small thing, but when you really unpack it, unbundle it, it's the crack to realize how absurd management culture is in the way in which it treats humans as well, not really as humans at all. Right. And tries to enforce this control mechanism. And then there's all this stress. Oh, I don't have enough holiday days, but I want to do this, but I've only had more. Just take the holidays. Take the holidays, because the point of a holiday is to be happy. The point of a holiday is not to come back from holiday resentful against your employer that you couldn't take those 2 extra days because you wanted to do something special with your loved ones. Go on holiday, have fun, be sensible about how you book it, and come back recharged and ready to rock. And that's it. And there's no more conversation here because I've got much better things to do. Think about how much time is invested into managing people's holidays at large organizations. It's just absurd. It's just completely absurd. And what it does is it drives the level of consciousness and culture and love in the organization down. True. Right? Because you're not trusting people. You're not trusting people. And so these small little things accumulate over time. And then we wonder why we have these toxic, negative, disengaged workplaces. Well, because we treat people in a toxic, negative, disengaging kind of way, right? And about absurd matters. Now, if it's about, let's say compliance and other areas that are important to be firm on, absolutely, we should be that. I'm not saying just take a laissez-faire approach to everything. But we have become stuck in these assumptions about what we think work means and what productivity means. And they are already being radically challenged now. And those organizations that are able to embrace these newer and what I would describe as more humanistic ways of working will succeed. And those that don't just won't. And I think the data is really clear about that. So, for those who are leading their organizations, that part of what that conversation is about is transitioning away from the management bureaucracy into a new organizing architecture. And I think that, that is going to be your innovation ecosystem, really. And that is an environment where you need leadership and entrepreneurship as much as you need management. And it's really about using culture and values and trust to engage and inspire people to work, as it is to force people to try and control them in a traditional traditional manner or traditional managerial manner. You know, I mean,
That's
there's this great example. This is just hilarious, right? Well, we're on this subject, right? But medieval peasants in Europe had more holidays than you do today, right? The medieval peasant
really
in Europe had like 100 days of holiday because the Catholic Church knew that if you make these people work too hard, they're going to rebel against all the landowners, right? It's a feudal system. Let's say I'm the landlord, right? You work on my land, and you know, you're kind of, you're not a slave. You're like you're free, but you're not that free. But if I push you too hard, you're like, fuck it, fuck these guys, and we'll just rebel and we'll burn everything to the ground. And where they did try and make people work too hard, that's what happened. And so, you know, we might have all these toys and tools that we have today, but if you look back historically, you have less working holidays than a medieval peasant by a substantial amount, right? So,
I didn't know
so
that.
that's something worth bearing in mind. Yeah, it's fascinating, right? It's fascinating.
All right, Jan, this has been a lovely chat, I must say. It's a great beginning to season 3. And we've talked some great things about how Google is facing the death spiral and that they should be reaching out to you to learn more about it or how to save themselves from it. And we also talked about the 4 days a week, how it's a new working policy and it's bringing radical change. And I think we had a great lesson at the end where you said to use culture, value, and trust to inspire your people to work for your organization. So thank you so much for being with us, and thank you, listeners. And I invite everyone to join us on Discord, as from next week, we'll be posting the details soon.
Thank you very much, Hannah. It's always great to be here with you.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the Leadapreneurs YouTube channel to get your weekly updates.